In the summer of 1944, Europe was burning. German Panzers prowled the French countryside, and Allied tanks crawled through fields of mud, smoke, and fear. Amid this chaos, a single American tank crew carved their name into history, and then vanished without a trace. The man at the center of it all was Lafayette Greenpool, a quiet farmer's son from Odom, Texas. He wasn't a career soldier. He wasn't born into power. He was just a mechanic, a man who loved engines and the rhythm of machines. When war came, he left his fields behind and joined the 3rd Armored Division, Spearhead. What he became over the next 3 months would defy all logic and military record. Poole was different from the moment he took command, calm under fire, fearless in motion. His crew, driver Wilbert "Baby" Richards, gunner Walker Hogan, and loader Berger, followed him without hesitation. Together, they operated a Sherman tank named In the Mood. It was more than a machine. It became a living thing, their home, their weapon, their heartbeat. When they landed in Normandy in June 1944, they were untested. The Bocage country was a nightmare of hedgerows, ambushes, and invisible enemies. Most American tanks didn't last long, but Poole and his men learned fast. They hit, moved, and hit again. Their coordination was so perfect that German officers began reporting a phantom tank that struck and disappeared before a counterattack could form. Within weeks, Poole's crew had destroyed dozens of armored vehicles. Within 2 months, over 200. Soldiers whispered about them in hushed tones. Infantrymen cheered when they saw In the Mood roll by. To them, Poole wasn't a man, he was a force of nature. He led the Spearhead Division through town after town, freeing civilians who'd never seen an American before. The villagers called him the Steel Angel. German prisoners, when questioned, spoke of a Texas devil whose tank moved faster than any they'd ever faced. But behind that legend, there was a man who wrote letters home to his wife, Evelyn. He wrote about the smell of wheat in France that reminded him of Texas. He wrote about how every sunrise felt like a borrowed one. He wrote that his hands wouldn't stop shaking after each battle, even when he pretended to be calm. He said, "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. The tank shakes, the ground shakes, and sometimes I think I'm shaking too," in one of his last letters. The military kept count of his victories. 258 confirmed armored kills in 81 days, a number no Allied tanker would ever match. It was impossible, and yet it happened. Officers came to interview him. Newspapers called him America's greatest tank ace, and General Rose himself congratulated him. But not everyone believed the numbers. Some said the reports were exaggerated, that the fog of war had inflated the myth. Others insisted that German radio logs confirmed every kill. Even today, historians argue, was Lafayette Poole truly that unstoppable, or had the legend grown larger than the man? By late August 1944, Poole had survived 3 tanks, each one named In the Mood. The first 2 had been destroyed in combat, burned to twisted steel, but he always climbed into another, refusing to stop. His final tank, In the Mood 3, rolled into Belgium on September 19, 1944. That morning, the crew joked about finally getting home by Christmas. The war seemed to be winding down. The Germans were retreating. Victory felt close enough to touch. Then, at 10:15 a.m., as they crossed a small bridge near Cone, a hidden German anti-tank gun opened fire. The first shell missed. The second struck the Sherman turret. Fragments ripped through the armor, killing 2 crewmen instantly. Lafayette Poole was thrown clear by the explosion. He survived, barely, his right leg shattered beyond repair. His war was over. He woke up in a field hospital surrounded by silence. No cheering, no engines, no crew. Only the sound of his own breathing. His records say he destroyed 258 enemy vehicles, liberated 1,200 prisoners, and led the spearhead through more than 20 French towns. But he never commanded a tank again. After the amputation, he returned to Texas, to the same quiet farmland he'd left behind. The hero of France went back to plowing fields. And that's where the mystery begins. Because decades later, when military historians tried to trace the official logs of Poole's kills, many were missing. Battle reports from August 1944 had been lost or erased. His crew's personal effects, the camera they used, the journals, the tank photos, all gone. Even In the Mood 3's wreck was never recovered. Some believe German records were destroyed in retreat. Others suspect the U.S. Army intentionally buried exaggerated reports to protect official statistics. And then there's the strangest theory of all, that Lafayette Poole's crew didn't lose their tank to a single ambush, but to friendly fire. A mistake quietly covered up to preserve morale. Poole never spoke publicly about that day. When journalists asked him, he'd simply say, "We did our part. The rest doesn't matter." He rarely discussed the war after that. Those who met him later described a man at peace, but haunted. In one rare interview in the 1960s, he paused mid-sentence and whispered, "I still hear the engine sometimes late at night." He lived a long, quiet life in Texas until 1991. When he died, the Army honored him as one of the greatest tank commanders in U.S. history. Yet even now, no one knows for certain where In the Mood 3 fell. Local farmers in Belgium still report finding bits of Sherman armor in their fields, twisted steel fragments, rusted numbers, a piece of a nameplate with the faint letters, "In the Mood." And so the story of Lafayette Poole remains half legend, half truth. A Texas farmer who turned a tank into a ghost, who led 3 lives, the soldier, the hero, and the man who came home to silence. His legacy isn't carved in stone or written in textbooks. It lingers in the smoke of a distant battlefield, in the mystery of missing records, and in the whisper of engines that once roared across Europe, unstoppable, unforgettable, and gone without a trace. Lafayette Poole never saw Europe again. After the explosion, he spent months in recovery, drifting in and out of morphine dreams, haunted by the faces of the men he'd lost. Sometimes he saw them in the corner of the hospital room. Berger laughing, Richards cleaning the machine gun, Hogan calling out a range. Sometimes he'd wake to the smell of diesel and gunpowder, though there was none. Doctors told him he'd never walk normally again. He told them he didn't need to. His war was over. But deep down, he knew something had been left unfinished, not just in Belgium, but inside himself. When he returned home to Texas, the town welcomed him like a legend. There were parades, interviews, flashbulbs. Reporters called him America's #1 tank ace. School children asked him how it felt to be a hero. He smiled, waved, and thanked him. But when night fell and the crowds were gone, he sat alone on the porch, staring at the fields. The rhythm of the wind through the grass reminded him of the tank engine, that deep, living hum that had carried him through France. People thought he'd move on easily, but the truth was, Lafayette Poole had left a part of himself somewhere on that Belgian road, the part that believed in purpose. The Army offered him a desk job. He refused. He tried to farm again, but even the roar of a tractor made his hands tremble. So he began visiting schools, talking to young soldiers about discipline and courage. He spoke calmly, never boasting, always ending with the same words. Remember the men beside you. The medals don't mean much
when they're gone. Years passed. Europe rebuilt. The world moved on to new wars, new names, and new heroes. But for Poole, the war never really ended. Every few years, historians would track him down, asking about the missing reports, the mystery of his 258 kills. He'd nod, listen politely, and say he didn't keep count. One journalist once asked, "Do you think the Army inflated your record?" He smiled faintly and said, "Does it matter? They were shooting back." There was something in his voice, not pride, not bitterness, but a quiet fatigue, as if he'd seen too much truth to care about numbers anymore. In the 1950s, a Belgian farmer plowing near a small stream outside Cologne unearthed a fragment of Sherman armor. Painted on it, in faint white letters, were the words, "In the mood." The U.S. Army examined it, but made no public statement. The piece was quietly stored in an archive and forgotten. Decades later, when researchers tried to locate it again, it had vanished from records. Another piece of a puzzle no one seemed eager to solve. Meanwhile, Poole had found a kind of peace. He remarried, raised children, and taught Sunday school. Those who knew him said he was gentle, kind, and humble, but sometimes when thunder rolled across the plains, he'd pause mid-sentence, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if listening for the echo of tank guns. In 1960, an old comrade from the Spearhead Division visited him. Over coffee, he mentioned the rumors that some in the Army believed In the Mood 3 had been struck not by a German gun, but by an American P-38 Lightning, mistaking them for enemy armor. Poole said nothing for a long time. Then he whispered, "I've heard that too." When his friend asked if it was true, he just looked away and said, "Let it stay buried." No one ever confirmed it. The official report simply read, "Tank destroyed by enemy fire." Yet the possibility of friendly fire cast a shadow over the story, a dark thread running beneath the glory. Perhaps that was why so many records vanished. Perhaps the truth was too painful, even for victory. By the 1980s, Lafayette Poole was an old man. The war had become history. Black and white footage, museum exhibits, stories told by men with silver hair and trembling voices. But his legend endured. Young officers still studied his tactics. Tankers still quoted his rule, always move after firing. And every so often, a letter would arrive from Europe, from a villager in France or a historian in Germany, asking if he remembered their town, their bridge, their street. Sometimes he'd write back. Sometimes he didn't. In his final years, he kept a model of a Sherman tank on his bedside table. Painted on the side, in careful white strokes, were the words, "In the Mood." When visitors asked why he still kept it, he'd say, "Because it's still out there, somewhere. Maybe someone will find it one day." Lafayette G. Poole died quietly in 1991, at the age of 71. His obituary was small, almost modest. It didn't mention the mystery. It didn't question the records. It simply said, "Staff Sergeant Lafayette Green Poole, United States Army, 3rd Armored Division, the most successful American tank commander of World War II." But to those who knew the full story, that line carried weight, because behind it lay questions that would never be answered. How one man and 3 others fought 81 days without rest, how they destroyed 258 armored vehicles, and how the war took everything from them but left them immortal in rumor. Even now, military historians debate whether his record was the product of battlefield chaos or genuine genius. But the soldiers who followed him, the ones who saw In the Mood charging through German fire, never doubted him. They said when Poole was in the lead, you felt untouchable. And maybe that's what legends are. Not facts carved in stone, but feelings burned into memory. Today, somewhere beneath Belgian soil, pieces of In the Mood 3 still sleep. A few bolts, a track link, maybe part of the nameplate. Time has claimed the rest. But when the wind moves through the fields, some say it sounds like an engine. Steady, low, unstoppable. Just like it did in 1944, when a Texas farmer and his 3 brothers-in-arms rolled through Europe and vanished into history.
Time passes differently for men who've seen war. For most, the years blur together, the routines, the small joys, the quiet nights. But for Lafayette Poole, every sunset was a reminder of one that came before. The smell of oil on his hands, the vibration of the treads, the sound of his crew laughing through static-filled radios. The war was far away, yet it lived inside him, like an echo that refused to fade. Sometimes, old veterans would find him, men who had served under his command or alongside the Spearhead Division. They'd bring photographs from 1944, grainy and worn. In some, a Sherman tank could be seen cutting through smoke, its barrel glowing from heat. On the turret, in faint chalk, 3 words, "In the mood." Poole would hold those pictures gently, as if afraid they might crumble, and then he'd say softly, "We were just kids, trying to get home." The legend of Lafayette Poole only grew with time. Military academies taught his tactics. Documentaries called him the lightning tanker. Even German historians admitted they feared his name. One officer, long after the war, was quoted saying, "There was something unnatural about him. We'd lose entire platoons to that one tank. It was as if it could see through the fog." But beneath all the awe and numbers lay a simple truth. Poole never wanted to be a legend. He wanted to survive. And that's the strange beauty of his story. His greatness was born not from ambition, but from duty, from the bond of 4 men who refused to stop moving, no matter how heavy the fire. In 1988, 3 years before his death, Poole was invited to a veterans reunion in Pennsylvania. The Army displayed a restored Sherman tank, same model as In the Mood. When he saw it, he reached out and placed his hand on the cold steel. He stood there for several minutes, saying nothing. Finally, he whispered, "She's lighter than I remember." And then he smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, as if he'd just met an old friend. Witnesses said that moment felt sacred, like time itself had folded, bringing the past and present together. A man and his machine, reunited, if only for a breath.